In a town shaped by the subtle machinations and political intrigue of its guilds, it's reassuring to see a goblin waving his torch and screaming about some nonsense or other.
Hey gang, just to let you know, you can now use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, at flipsidegaming.com and originalmagicart.store. Using the code gets you 10% off orders $10 or more, and you get to help out the channel at the same time. Welcome back, my friends. We are back at Platinum Star Games for another EDH game. This week we have Kyle, who's new to the channel, playing Jalira, and he keeps 3 islands, Sapphire Medallion, Rewind, Sphinx of Bethune, and Fog Bank. Jack is playing his Will and Rowan deck, keeping a Felwar Stone, an Ancient Tomb, a Mountain, an Island, Disallow, and Mission Briefing. Steve is back with his Vorel deck, keeping Botanical Sanctum, Forest, Island, Niece of Vital Force, Spikeweaver, Appetite for the Unnatural, and Opal Palace. Last but not least, we have John playing his Firesong and Sunspeaker, keeping a Plains, Core Haven, Darksteel Plate, Mountain, Thought Vessel, Weathered Wayfarer, and Austere Command. Steve wins the die roll and starts us off. Steve plays an untapped Botanical Sanctum, passing. John plays a Plains, and he casts Weathered Wayfarer. Kyle plays an Island, and passes. Jack plays an Ancient Tomb, and taps it, taking 2 life loss to cast a Felwar Stone. Steve plays a Forest, and he casts Evolutionary Leap. John plays a Mountain, and casts a Thought Vessel. Kyle plays an Island, and he casts Fog Bank. Jack also plays an Island, and passes. Steve has the 3rd island we played, and he drops Vorel before passing to John. John draws for turn, and activates his Wayfarer to go and find a land. He grabs a Plateau, and puts it to his hand, and plays it for turn. He then passes. Kyle plays an Island, and casts a Worn Power Stone, which comes in tapped, and he passes. Jack draws, and plays a Mountain. He then drops Tezzeret Artifice Master, and upticks him to make a 1/1 colorless Thopter. Steve plays an Opal Palace, and he casts a Lore Scale Coatl, and passes to John. John activates his Weathered Wayfarer after drawing, and he goes to find a Boseiju who shelters all. He plays it as his land for turn, which comes in tapped, and he passes after casting Darksteel Plate. Kyle plays an Island for his turn, and he taps all but 1 island to cast an Aether Gale. He bounces Tezzeret, the Coatl, the Evolutionary Leap, the Thought Vessel, the Darksteel Plate, and the Wayfarer, and then passes turn. Jack replays Tezzeret, taking 2, and upticks his Planeswalker to make another Thopter. Steve for his turn recasts the Lore Scale Coatl and passes to John. John plays a Core Haven as his land for turn, and he recasts Thought Vessel, then the Wayfarer once more. Kyle plays an Island as his land for turn, and brings out Jalira in his main phase. He then casts a Sapphire Medallion, and he passes to Jack. Jack is struggling for lands at this point, so he uses Tezzeret's Zero ability, which lets him draw 2 cards as long as he has 3 artifacts out. He then plays a Sulphur Falls as his land for turn, and he casts a Sol Ring and then a Chromatic Lantern. With nothing else, he passes to Steve. Steve draws and gets to put a +1/+1 counter on his Coatl. He then casts Appetite for the Unnatural in his main phase and blows up Jack's Chromatic Lantern, and Steve gains 2 life. Steve then recasts his Evolutionary Leap, and he passes turn. John pays 4 to cast a Hedron Archive in his main phase, and passes. Kyle draws for turn, and also passes. Jack draws for his turn, and uses Tezzeret's Zero ability once more to draw 2 more cards. He is then able to play his Cascading Cataracts, and he rearranges his mana, passing turn. Steve draws and puts another +1/+1 counter on his Coatl. He then casts Kiyora's Follower in his main phase, and he passes turn. John draws and plays a tapped Secluded Step. He then recasts his Darksteel Plate, and with that done, passes to Kyle. At the end of John's turn, Kyle activates Jalira's ability and sacrifices the Fog Bank. He then reveals until he hits another creature, and the Tidespout Tyrant hits the field. Before moving to the end step though, John hits the Tidespout with a Path to Exile, and Kyle has to go find a land. Kyle casts a Domineering Will in his main phase, gaining control over the Wayfarer, the Coatl, and the Follower. Moving to combat, he swings them all at Tezzeret. Jack blocks 2 of the creatures, and Tezzeret only takes 2, while the Wayfarer dies. In his post-combat main phase, Kyle then activates Jalira once more and sacrifices the Follower, revealing until he hits the Hoverguard Sweepers. He bounces Vorel and the Coatl back to Steve's hand. Kyle then casts an Everflowing Chalice, multi-kicked only once, and he passes to Jack. Jack casts a Thought Vessel in his main phase, and he casts Bribery. He targets Steve, and he goes to find a creature from his library. He grabs Steve's Deep Glow Skate and doubles the counters on Tezzeret as it enters. Jack then upticks Tezzeret to 9 to make a Thopter, and he passes turn. Steve plays a Force as a land for turn, and he casts Nissa, Vital Force. He animates one of his islands, and he moves to swing at Tezzeret. Jack blocks with Steve's own Deep Glow Skate, and with nothing else, Steve passes. At the end of Steve's turn, John takes 2 as he taps Boseiju, and uses the uncounterable mana to cast Chaos Warp and targets Tezzeret. Jack shuffles a Planeswalker in, and he reveals an Izzet Locket, putting it into play. John draws for his turn, and with nothing else, passes to Kyle. Kyle casts a Sphinx of Ithune in his main phase, and has John make 2 piles of cards. Kyle decides to take the pile with Faded Infatuation in it, and moving to combat, he swings the Hover Guard at Steve's Nissa for 5. Jack casts Will in his main phase, and then swings the Lone Thopter at Nissa to take her out. He then upticks Will and targets both of Kyle's big flyers. Steve draws for turn, and plays a Force as a land for turn. He then recasts Vorel and passes to John. John plays a tapped Sacred Foundry and passes. At the end of turn, Kyle casts Faded Infatuation and targets his Sphinx of Ithune. Jack stops us though with a Disallow, and we move to Kyle's turn. Kyle starts his turn off by spinning the wheel and sacrificing the Hover Guards to Jalira's ability. He reveals off the top until he hits Ixodron, and as it comes into play, this flips over all their creatures and makes them 2/2s. With nothing else, he passes to Jack. Jack draws for turn and downticks Will, drawing 2 cards and reducing the cost of walkers, instants, and sorceries by 2 until his next turn. He plays a Mountain as his land for turn, and we then see a Nexus of Fate. Kyle puts Rewind onto the stack to stop it, but Jack then uses Twincast to copy Kyle's Rewind to counter the Rewind. Jack then responds to his own spell in the stack, and he casts Mission Briefing. He surveils 2 but keeps both on top, and then flashes back Twincast to copy Nexus of Fate. This gives him 2 extra turns, and he shuffles the extra turn spell into his library. As Jack passes from his normal turn, John casts the Tear half of Wear and Tear to blow up Jack's Soul Ring. Jack starts his first extra turn by downticking Will once more. He draws 2, and then takes 2 damage, tapping his Ancient Tomb to help cast Ugin for only 6. He upticks Ugin to shoot Vorel that had been flipped, and Steve responds to the targeting by sacrificing the creature to Evolutionary Leap. He reveals until he finds Zamek Guildmage and puts it to hand. Jack then casts Compulsive Research and draws 3 and discards a land, and we then see Chandra Flamecaller hitting the field. Jack downticks her to deal damage to all the creatures on the board and essentially wipe it, and passes to his next extra turn. Jack's second extra turn has him draw an island, and he plays it, and then casts Treasure Cruise after delving away most of his graveyard. This is after he cracks his Arid Mesa, taking 1 to go and find a mountain. He then floats some mana before casting Thoughts of Ruin, which has everyone sacrifice lands based on how many cards Jack has in hand, which just so happens to be 9 right now. John also floats all of his mana, taking 2 as well. Jack then casts Cryptic Command, choosing to bounce a permanent and draw a card, targeting one of John's mana rocks. John responds with Radiate, which is the bane to my existence, and it forces Jack to bounce every possible permanent back to its owner's hand. With all of these on the stack, Jack then floats more mana with his mana rocks, and bounces his walkers and his rocks back to his hand. It's at this point that Steve's seen enough and wisely scoops it up from this nonsense, and Jack has 3 floating mana, which he uses to cast Thought Vessel, and then taps the vessel, and uses his 1 remaining to cast Felwar Stone, and passes. John draws, and passes turn. Kyle draws, and plays an island. He then plays an unkicked Everflowing Chalice, and passes. Jack plays an island, and pays 3 to cast Izzet Locket, passing. John draws, and passes. Kyle draws, and plays an island. He then casts Sapphire Medallion, and passes. Jack draws, and plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it to go find a Steam Vents, taking 3, and casts Gilded Lotus, passing before searching for the Steam Vents. John draws and plays a mountain, passing. Kyle plays a Tectonic Edge as his land for turn, and wishes he could use it like a strip mine. Sadly he can't, so he casts a Worn Power Stone tapped, and passes. Jack plays a Cephalid Colosseum, and he recasts Will. He then downticks him to draw 2, and casts Karn for only 2 mana. He uses Karn's ability to make a construct that gets +1/+1 for each artifact he controls, and he passes turn. John draws and passes, discarding down to 7. Kyle plays an island, and he casts Dreamstone Hedron. In response, Jack casts Frantic Search for 1 because of Will's ability, and draws 2 and discards 2, then untaps 3 lands. He then casts Glimmer of Genius for 2, scrying 2 cards and keeping 1 on top and bottoming 1, then drawing 2 and gaining 2 energy. Jack then casts a Mystical Tutor, taking 1 again from the Colosseum and going to find a Capsize. Jack plays an island for his turn and downticks Will once more to reduce spell costs and draw 2 cards. Jack then casts Chandra Flamecaller and then Tamiyo. He downticks Karn to make another construct, then upticks Chandra to make 2 3/1 elementals with haste. Jack then upticks Tamiyo to tap down Kyle's Dreamstone Hedron, and moving to combat, swings the elementals and the old construct at Kyle for 12. Drawn draws for turn, discarding and passing. Kyle draws and casts Kaiga in his main phase, which is a feat unto itself considering a few turns before he had literally nothing, and with nothing else, he passes. Jack upticks Tamiyo to tap down Kaiga and plays a Misty Rainforest. He then upticks Karn and lets Kyle pick which card he gets. Jack then upticks Chandra to make 2 more elementals and swings everything at Kyle for 18 damage this time. John draws and discards, passing. Kyle draws for turn and can see that Jack has enough lands to meet the criteria for Tectonic Edge. He sacrifices it to blow up the Cephalid Colosseum, but Jack has the perfect answer for it with Trickbind. Jack also cracks his Misty Rainforest to pay for it, taking 1, and with nothing else, Kyle casts Swiftfoot Boots and then puts them onto his dragon and passes. Jack plays a Forge of Heroes as land for turn and brings back Ugin, aka Eugene. He then upticks Karn and Kyle gives Jack the Nexus of Fate since he can't cast it again. It's at this point that Jack asks for more dice, but John and Kyle are pretty much done with the game at this point, so they happily concede to him and move to the next game. Game review time. So unfortunately for Steve, he wasn't really in this game. The few creatures he got out were either flipped or killed. There was never really a chance for him to accelerate his board state, and he didn't seem to draw very many lands, and that kept him behind for most of the game. I don't think I've ever seen a Jalira deck in action, so thanks to Kyle for bringing his deck with him that day. I'll be honest, whenever he activated Jalira and sacrificed a creature, I was expecting him to flip into some kind of degenerate creature, but he seemed to play some modest and powerful creatures instead. John's Firesong deck is the bane of my existence, as he always seems to feel the need to cast Radiate, which just complicates a game unnecessarily. Thanks a lot, John, you're a monster. I do have another example of him playing this deck, and it does really well, but unfortunately the game is like 3 hours long, so it'll be a while before you see it. Lastly, Jack's Will and Rowan deck was a thing to see, even though he didn't actually cast Rowan. Will seems like the more powerful of the two, with his -2 being incredible. I think this would have been one of the games where mass land destruction was acceptable if it weren't for the fact that he tried to get greedy and bounced John's mana rocks, and then John was able to radiate it. Thankfully the game only went on a few more turns after that, and they were quite quick with people either playing lands or discarding cards, so it ended fast. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.